Howdy parents and kids and whoever might be watching today. Mr. Harry here, just looking today to give you a brief overview of our shared reading program in kindergarten. Shared reading helps kindergartners to learn their sight words or their high frequency words for the year, but it does much more than just rote drill and practice and things of that sort. It really helps reading to become very authentic and meaningful, and it puts words in their natural context as we explore different books together and learn together. It's important that when students learn these vocabulary skills and all of these words, that they're really learning them in their natural context. That being said, we kind of work on a 5-day plan when we do shared reading in kindergarten, and I'm just going to kind of take you through each of those different 5 days here in this video. Our program centers around the use of some different instructional level big books by a company called Benchmark, and there are enough big books to last the duration of the school year, so we'll always have more books to read together all throughout the duration of the year. As implied in the name, shared reading is when the entire class will be reading a book together. There's other programs that we do that are a little bit different, such as guided reading. You might remember that from the beginning of the year. But in shared reading, it's not just one child, it's the whole class together. And consequently, here are those 5 days. Here's the 5-day plan I was referring to earlier. We start with day number 1, and I would introduce the big book for the week. You will have already seen a lot of those coming home and heard about a lot of those at your house already from your child. Before actually getting into the book itself, we would actually learn the vocabulary words that are new for that week, and those are those sight words that you've already seen coming home in your child's folder on those tag board cards. These are to be used as practice cards, as you've been told already. While in my first year of teaching vocab word practice, I really was doing a little bit more kind of rote drill. I was taking the note cards and we're looking at the words as the class together. That could become boring at times, so I've tried to spice it up a little bit and tried to use some of my fortes as a teacher, which would be technology. And so we've tried to use technology in the classroom to show them their sight words. So a lot of times I'll have the sight words coming in on the screen, and the boys and girls are saying them together. Sometimes we'll alternate boy and girl. Sometimes we'll do different tables. We'll have to say the words as they come up. And sometimes we'll even put pictures on the screen so that we can keep their attention. I know sometimes it's hard to keep the attention of a 5-year-old, so I like to throw some pictures in there too to keep their attention as they're learning their sight words. And anyway, after doing our vocabulary, we would do what is called a cover talk. So we take out that new book and we look at the front of it and we start to explore the pictures on the front, start to make some different predictions. We definitely like to talk about the different elements on that cover. We talk about the title as its name, the author writes the words, the illustrator adds pictures, and you may have heard some of those songs as your child has come home to you and maybe sung you some of those songs. The author writes the words, the author writes the words, and so on. So like to try to make that a little bit sing-songy so that they can remember those different book elements. Like I said, in a cover talk, we talk about the picture on the book, and we go on and we'd start to do what we call a picture walk throughout the whole book. Before we even read the words, we like to look at each of the pictures on every page and get different students' input on what they see is happening in those pictures, and again, making different predictions about what we think might be happening in the story, and really trying to relate what they see on the page to everyday life. It's really important for students to make these text-to-self connections while they're scanning the book. And the final thing on day 1 would simply be for me to do a teacher read of the book. I'm reading, they're listening. Sometimes I may stop and ask the student something like, how do I know that I'm at the end of a sentence? And I would be looking, of course, for a student to raise their hand and tell me that there's a period at the end of the sentence. So just taking the opportunity to look at different things like that in the book as I read it the first day. On day number 2, we would revisit the big book again from the previous day. And day 2 is usually where I would do an echo read. That means I read it and then they read it. They're getting pretty good at that right now. I like to try to review the new sight word for the week by different methods. Sometimes this means having a student come up to the book and matching the note card with the word written on it to the word as it's seen in the title, or maybe somewhere in the big book on one of the pages. Lots of different strategies can be used here. Later in the year, once the students get to have a more solid working vocabulary, I may, on a day 2, play something called Guess My Word, kind of like Hangman, but hangman as you might traditionally know it. We're not hanging anybody. Probably not going to do that in kindergarten. It wouldn't really be appropriate. So I try to kind of just keep that as guess my word. And on day 3, we would come back, we'd revisit the book one more time, and by doing a girl-boy read, so girls would read one page, boys would read another page. And on these days, usually Wednesdays, we would also make our mini books. And I know that you guys pretty much know about those mini books because they've been coming home. I've been getting your signatures as you've been signing off on their homework as they've read to you 2 times. Well, in class, this is where they would cut out the books. They kind of know the routine now. They cut on the dotted line like a square. They put page 4 and page 2. They fold it like a book, raise their hand, and the teacher comes to staple it. They're really getting to that routine now as they make their mini books. And what we do, I usually give one student becomes peanut butter, one student is jelly, and so peanut butter always reads first. Jelly knows that they always read second, and they would read through the book 2 times, so they've always got that practice before they come home to do that homework assignment with you. And just as a friendly reminder, when they do come home with that mini book in their folder, if you would make sure they're really just finger pointing to each of those words. We want to make sure that they're having one-to-one correspondence, that they know that those words are what they're not just memorizing the text, but they're not just memorizing the pages, but they actually know what they're reading. And so on day 4 of our 5-day plan, I usually like to have the students do a choral read. So this would just mean that all of the students are reading the book together all at once, a choral read. And we usually like to throw in a few sight word games on Thursday as well. One of the games that the students have really come to like this year is called Crossaway. And you may have been wondering what this is when it comes home, all these words crossed out. Well, we take usually 9 words, but sometimes I'll put more. Later in the year, I'll kind of cross down and make some triangles in different shapes so that we can fit some more words onto that page. But usually in the beginning of the year we start with just 9 words, and I have my words up front and the students have theirs that are the same version at their seats, and I usually ask them to take out their crayon of choice and hold it up. And so they can either cross out the word that I'm talking about, or they can fill in the rectangle or whatever they'd like to do that they're identifying that word. And so I would write a word on the board. I would have students identify what that word is. Usually we have, again, some sing-songy songs that we can use to remember those words. So if it's a 2-letter word, it might be if you're happy and you know and spell it I-T, if you're happy and you know, and so on. And there's some different songs depending on how many letters it has. But kids really like Crossway. Helps them to remember those words and see them frequently. And finally, on day 5 of our plan, I like to do what I call a mistake read. Students think this is funny because the teacher's messing up, but of course I'm messing up on purpose and reading through, and I always make one mistake on a page, and once I've made that mistake, it's the student's job to figure out what is Mr. Harry's mistake, and then we would figure out the mistake and read it all the correct way, and we go all the way through the book doing that. Usually that's on a Friday. After finishing our mistake read, I would model our sentence worksheet, and we don't want to do too many worksheets in school, especially in kindergarten. We want to do a lot of things that are hands-on activities, but every once in a while, worksheets such as these are really helpful because they help the students to recognize that they can write these sentences that they're seeing in their big books. And so at the beginning of the year, we would literally go over each letter of each word, talk about the differences between letters and words and how letters are the things that form words. And then we would usually we do that first one together, and we figure out that the empty space is for our picture and that something's going to go in that empty space that would help to make the sentence make sense. And as the year progresses, the students will be able to do this more independently, and it just becomes a really fun way to model for themselves what they've already been seeing in that big book. And I'd come around and have them touch read their sentences to me and give them a star for touch reading those sentences to me. Well, these are not the only components of shared reading. At times during the year we'll be sharing together in nursery rhymes and other types of big books and things like this. But this 5-day plan with our benchmark books are typically what happened for our shared reading program. Thanks for listening. Have a good one.